The universe is not empty, it is merely quiet, waiting for someone loud enough to break it. In the 34th century, the silence of the Thorn sector was broken by the hum of the Krell hegemony. To the Krell, space was a garden, and they were the only species evolved enough to pull the weeds. They were a civilization built on the philosophy of the refined path. Everything they touched had to be elegant. Their buildings were spires of singing crystal, their clothes were woven from light, and their warships, the pride of the emperor, were masterpieces of aesthetic destruction. General Vraxen sat in the center of the Sun Eater, a dreadnought that stretched 4 kilometers from prow to stern. It was shaped like a curved feather, shimmering with a pearlescent hull that phased in and out of the visible spectrum. Vraxen didn't use screens. He used a neural link that allowed him to feel the vacuum of space. "Report," Vraxen commanded. His voice was a rasping click, smoothed over by a high-end universal translator. "We have entered the gravity well of the 3rd planet, General," his science officer, Xylth, replied. Xylth was a younger Krell, his exoskeleton still soft and pale. "The inhabitants call it Terra. Our probes indicate a heavy reliance on primitive fission and chemical propulsion. They are remarkably loud on the radio spectrum. It's like a nursery full of screaming infants." Vraxen looked at the holographic projection of Earth. It was a marble of blue and green wrapped in a messy web of satellites and space debris. To him, it looked like a junkyard. "They have ignored our ultimatum," Vraxen asked. "Worse, General," they sent a reply. "It took our linguists 3 cycles to decode it because the dialect was so unrefined. It translated to, 'We don't want to fight, but we aren't moving. Please stay on your side of the fence.'" Vraxen's mandibles twitched in what passed for a smile. "A fence. They think the vacuum is a backyard. Send the vanguard. Do not use the heavy lances yet. I want to see how these humans bleed before we erase them." The anvil of Mars the Krell did not expect a defense. They expected a massacre. When the first 3 Krell destroyers vessels that could evaporate an ocean slipped past the orbit of Mars, they were met by the UNS Iron Duke. The Iron Duke was everything the Krell ships were not. It was a brutalist nightmare. It was a collection of pressurized cylinders, massive cooling fins, and thick, slab-sided armor made of depleted uranium and ceramic composites. It didn't shimmer. It was painted a flat, soulless gray. On the bridge of the Iron Duke, Admiral Marcus Thorn chewed on a piece of synthetic nicotine. He was 70 years old, with skin like tanned leather and eyes that had seen the ice mines of Europa. "Admiral," the sensor tech shouted, "Krell vessels are decloaking. They're beautiful, sir. Look like glass sculptures. Sculptures break, son," Thorn said, his voice a low growl. "Range 50,000 kilometers. They're charging energy signatures. They think we're a cargo hauler. Let them think it," Thorn said. "Warm up the magnets. Keep the capacitors at 90%. I don't want them seeing a power spike until the slugs are already in the air." In the void, the Krell destroyers opened their petals. These were focusing arrays for their plasma lances. To the Krell, war was a ceremony. You signaled your intent, you displayed your power, and then you delivered a clean, hot death. The lead Krell ship fired, a beam of violet energy focused through a series of perfect diamonds, struck the Iron Duke square in the chest. In the Krell observation deck, Vraxen waited for the ship to vanish. He waited for the hull to turn into a cloud of expanding gas. But it didn't happen. The Iron Duke's hull glowed white hot. The ceramic plates shattered and sloughed off, carrying the heat away from the ship in a technique known as ablative shedding. It was messy, it was primitive, and it worked. "They're still there," Xylth whispered, staring at his sensors. "The heat dissipation is 94% effective. How? They have no energy shields. They use their own skin as a shield," Vraxen hissed, his eyes narrowing. "Disgusting. Fire again." The law of conservation of momentum. Admiral Thorn didn't wait for a second shot. "Computer," Thorn said calmly, Solve for X. Release the hounds. The Iron Duke didn't have lances. It had 3 mile long vacuum, sealed tubes wrapped in superconducting magnets. For 200 years, human scientists had realized they couldn't beat the speed of light, so they decided to master the speed of mass. A sound like the hammer of God echoed through the hull of the Iron Duke. 3 slugs, each the size of a school bus and made of solid tungsten carbide, were accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. Because there is no friction in space, these slugs did not lose velocity. They did not glow. They were just silent, invisible ghosts of kinetic energy. The Krell destroyers didn't even have time to adjust their sensors. The first slug hit the lead Krell ship. Because the Krell used soft energy shields designed to refract light and heat, the solid mass of the tungsten slug passed through the shield like a brick through a soap bubble. It struck the pearlescent hull. The physics were simple. $F equals ma dollar. When that much mass meets that much velocity, the result isn't a hole. It's a molecular divorce. The Krell ship didn't explode in a fireball. It pulverized. The kinetic energy converted the front half of the ship into a spray of liquid crystal and vaporized crew members. The shockwave traveled through the internal frame, snapping the ship's elegant spine in 6 places. Target 1 neutralized. The Iron Duke's AI spoke in a pleasant female voice. On the Sun Eater, General Vraxen stood up, his 4 hands gripping the railing of his command dais. What was that? A missile? We detected no exhaust trail. It wasn't a missile, General, Xylth stammered. It was a rock, a very fast rock. Vraxen felt a prickle of something he hadn't felt in centuries. It was the feeling of a predator realizing the prey has a knife. All ships. Vraxen roared. Full combat spread. Deploy the drone swarms. If they want to throw stones, we will burn their entire sky. The industrial ghost, the conflict began to escalate. As the Krell fleet moved deeper into the solar system, they expected the humans to retreat to their home planet. Instead, they found the belt. The asteroid belt was not just a collection of rocks to the humans, it was their forge. The Krell fleet sailed into a trap that had been set for 50 years. Every hollow, doubt asteroid, every mining station, every fuel depot had been converted into a hidden battery. They're coming out of the walls. A Krell pilot screamed over the comms. A mining barge, looking like a rusted skeleton, drifted alongside a Krell frigate. The Krell ignored it. It had no weapons, no life signs. Then the barge's side panels fell away, revealing a massive industrial-grade mass driver used for launching ore. Instead of ore, it launched a shipping container filled with scrap metal and nuclear waste. The impact didn't just destroy the Krell frigate. It poisoned the wreckage, making it impossible for Krell repair drones to get near it. This isn't war, Vraxen whispered as he watched the tactical map turn red. This is. Butchery? No, General, Xylth replied, his voice hollow. This is what they call total war. They aren't trying to win a duel. They're trying to make the environment so hostile that we cannot exist within it. On Earth, the message was clear. Every factory, every 3D printer, every garage was focused on one thing, making the rocks a bigger and the magnets stronger. The humans weren't fighting for honor. They weren't fighting for the refined path. They were fighting like an animal backed into a corner with teeth, claws, and a terrifying understanding of the laws of physics. Vraxen looked at the screen as a new signature appeared. It was massive, larger than his own flagship. What is that? He asked. The humans call it the Anvil, Xylth said. It's not a ship, General. It's a mobile shipyard, and it's charging its main rail. Vraxen realized then that his mockery was his tombstone. The humans hadn't been hiding their weapons. They were the weapon. General Vraxen had been taught that war was a transaction. You trade energy for territory. You trade lives for influence. But as the Krell fleet pushed past Jupiter's orbit, he realized the humans were operating on a different branch of mathematics entirely. They were trading everything for nothing. They are detonating their own stations, Xylth reported, his voice trembling as he watched the tactical feed. The mining colony on Ganymede they didn't evacuate. As our boarding craft touched down, they overloaded the fusion core. They killed 4,000 of our elite shock troops, but they killed 10,000 of their own civilians to do it. Vraxen stood motionless. To a Krell, life was the ultimate currency. You lived for centuries. You spent decades perfecting a single craft. The idea of suicide was a biological error, a glitch in the software of a sentient mind. Why? Vraxen asked, his voice barely a whisper. We would have taken them as subjects. They would have been fed. They would have been integrated. The intercepted transmission from the colony governor was brief, General. Xylth said, hesitant. It simply said, better a grave than a cage. Vraxen looked out at the distant flares of light in the Jovian shadow. Every flare was a human outpost choosing annihilation over submission. He was beginning to realize that he wasn't fighting a military. He was fighting a collective psychosis, a species that had spent its entire history fighting itself, and now that it had a common enemy, it was applying that ancestral brutality with terrifying focus. The ghost fleet of Saturn, the Krell's pride, the Sun Eater, led a formation of 60 dreadnoughts toward the rings of Saturn. Vraxen believed he had identified the human headquarters, a massive, sprawling complex of habitats and shipyards hidden within the ice rings. Scans show no movement, Xylth noted. The thermal signatures are low. They've gone dark. They are hiding in the ice, Vraxen commanded. Burn it, melt the rings. I want the water vapor to choke their engines. The Krell ships opened their wings. Great arcs of golden plasma swept into the rings of Saturn, flash, boiling billions of tons of ice into steam. The visual sensors were blinded by the sudden mist, a white wall of vapor stretching for thousands of kilometers. Then the ghosts appeared. They weren't ships in the traditional sense. They were stealth, Thriggsy industrial tugs covered in radar, absorbent foam, tethered to massive chunks of iron-rich asteroid. They didn't have engines. They had been thrown into the rings weeks ago, drifting on Newtonian paths that the Krell computers had dismissed as natural debris. Suddenly, those chunks of rock opened. Hidden inside the asteroids were short-range kinetic pods, essentially giant shotguns loaded with millions of ball bearings made of depleted uranium. Impact alert, the bridge sensors screamed. It wasn't a single blast, it was a hailstorm. Millions of tiny ultra-dense pellets struck the Krell shields. Individually, they were nothing, but the Krell shields were designed to deflect beams of energy, not the persistent, grinding friction of a million physical hits per second. The shields began to ripple and bleed. The golden light flickered, turning a sickly orange. They're overloading the frequency, Xylth shouted. The kinetic friction is creating a feedback loop in the emitters. And then, from out of the steam, came the USN Minotaur. It was a brawler-class battleship, a ship designed for one purpose, to get close and stay there. It had no long-range missiles. It had no elegant lasers. It was covered in 12 feet of reinforced steel and had 6 massive industrial claws normally used for grappling space stations. The Minotaur slammed into the side of the Krell dreadnought luminous presence. There was no explosion. There was the horrific screeching sound of metal screaming against crystal. The Minotaur used its grappling claws to lock onto the Krell ship's hull, and then it began to drill. They are boarding us, the Krell captain of the luminous presence screamed over the open channel. They aren't using shuttles. They are cutting through the hull with mining lasers. They're coming through the vents. The terror in the dark Vraxen watched the internal security feeds of the luminous presence. He saw the Krell warriors, tall and graceful, wielding light, blades that could slice through bone like water. They stood ready in the corridors, waiting for the human soldiers, But the humans who came through the holes weren't soldiers. Not exactly, they were breachers. They wore massive hydraulic power, suits designed for deep core mining. They didn't carry rifles. They carried thermal lances and pneumatic hammers. They were bulky, slow, and looked like walking tanks. The Krell warriors moved with lightning speed, their blades humming. They struck the human suits, leaving deep gouges in the metal. But the humans didn't fall, they didn't even flinch. A breacher reached out with a massive mechanical hand, grabbed a Krell warrior by the throat, and simply squeezed. The sound of the exoskeleton snapping was audible even on the grainy video feed. "They don't feel pain," Xylth cried out, horrified. "We are hitting them with enough energy to kill a Thraxian beast, and they just keep walking. It's not that they don't feel it." Vraxen realized, his mandibles locking in fear. "It's that they've decided it doesn't matter. They've accepted their deaths before they even boarded. You cannot intimidate a creature that has already said goodbye to its soul." The luminous presence was lost in 20 minutes, not because the Krell were outfought, but because they were out-willed. The humans didn't try to capture the bridge. They simply marched to the reactor room and turned the ship into a second sun. The general's doubt Vraxen stood in his darkened bridge. The scorched nebula of Saturn's rings was now a graveyard for a third of his fleet. He looked at his hands that had signed the death warrants of a dozen worlds. They were shaking. "General," Xylth said, his voice small, "the humans are sending another signal. It's on all frequencies. It's a video loop." Vraxen looked at the screen. It wasn't a military broadcast. It was a montage of Earth. He saw children playing in fields of yellow grain. He saw old men sitting on benches under the shade of ancient trees. He saw artists painting, lovers holding hands, and the vast, beautiful chaos of a billion lives lived in peace. And then the image shifted. It showed the factories. It showed those same people, the artists, the lovers, the fathers standing at assembly lines, their faces covered in soot, their eyes hollow with exhaustion, building the very slugs that were tearing the Krell fleet apart. The message at the bottom of the screen read, "We wanted the fields. You gave us the forge. We will not stop until the forge is all that is left of us, and all that is left of you." Vraxen realized the Krell had committed the ultimate sin of the Conqueror. They hadn't just attacked a planet. They had interrupted a species that was finally, after millennia of blood, trying to be kind. And in response, humanity had put its kindness in a box, locked it, and thrown away the key. "General," Xylth asked, "what are your orders?" Vraxen looked at the map. The humans were no longer defending. They were forming a line. A massive, jagged line of ships, debris, and automated platforms. They were moving toward the Krell's jump gate, the only way back to the hegemony. "They aren't trying to drive us away," Vraxen whispered. "Then what are they doing?" "They're trying to make sure we can never leave." The weight of the atmosphere, the transition from the elegant war to the war of attrition, was complete. Vraxen ordered the fleet to retreat to the edge of the solar system, hoping to regroup and use their superior speed to outflank the human wall. But as they reached the Kuiper Belt, they found the final horror of human ingenuity. The humans hadn't just built ships. They had rigged the celestial bodies themselves. "General, long-range sensors are picking up massive gravitational distortions," Xylth shouted. "The humans, they've attached fusion engines to the moons of Pluto. They're moving them." Vraxen's logic finally broke. "They are moving moons into our flight path." "Not into our path, General," Xylth said, staring at the screen in pure, unadulterated awe. "They're using them as shields. They're pushing Charon ahead of their main fleet. We can't fire through a moon." Behind the drifting moon of Charon, the entire remains of the United Solar Navy waited. Thousands of ships, 10,000 smaller interceptors, 1,000,000 automated drones. It was a tidal wave of iron and anger, shielded by 1 billion tons of rock. Vraxen turned to his console. He began to type a message to the High Council back home. He didn't ask for reinforcements. He didn't ask for a new strategy. He wrote, "Do not send more ships. Close the gate. Forget we exist. We have poked a hole in the side of a mountain, and we didn't find a cave. We found a volcano." As he hit send, the moon of Charon cleared the Krell's firing arc, and the USN Stalingrad pattered, scorched, but still screaming with kinetic energy appeared on the main view screen. The countdown began again. 3, 2, 1. For the fields of Earth, the sky turned to fire. The Great Gate was a marvel of Krell engineering, a ring of shimmering, sentient mercury suspended in the vacuum of the Uit cloud. It was the only umbilical cord connecting Vraxen's dying fleet to the hegemony's heart worlds. If the humans took the gate, they wouldn't just win the war for Sol. They would have a spear pointed at the throat of every Krell child in the galaxy. General Vraxen stood on the bridge of the Sun Eater. The ship was no longer the pristine needle of light it had been. Its pearlescent hull was scorched black, and one of its sweeping wings had been sheared off by a human kinetic slug. "Status of the gate," Vraxen asked. His voice was no longer the rasp of a conqueror. It was the rattle of a man in a tomb. "Stabilizing at 60%, Xylth replied. His exoskeleton was cracked from a secondary explosion on the bridge. "The High Council has received your warning, General. They are initiating the disconnect protocol from the other side. They are going to collapse the gate to prevent the humans from following us." Vraxen closed his eyes. "They are abandoning us. They are surviving, General, as you suggested." Outside the view screen, the human wall had arrived. It was a terrifying sight. Thousands of ships, from massive dreadnoughts to tiny, jury-rigged freighters, formed a semicircle around the gate. They didn't fire immediately. They simply sat there, a silent jury of steel and fire. In the center of the human formation was the USN Stalingrad, its massive rail. Gun was glowing a low, ominous orange, the magnets humming so loudly they could be picked up on the Krell's audio sensors. A transmission flickered onto the screen. It wasn't Admiral Thorne this time. It was a younger woman, her flight suit stained with oil and blood, her eyes wide with a strange, calm exhaustion. "General Vraxen," she said, "I am Captain Elena Vance. My ship is the only thing between you and that gate. We know your people are closing it from the other side. We know you have nowhere to go." Vraxen leaned forward. "Then why do you hesitate, Captain? Finish your math. Fire your rocks and be done with it." Elena Vance looked at someone off camera, then back at Vraxen. "Because my grandfather was a historian. He told me that the most dangerous moment in a war isn't the first shot. It's the last one. If we kill you now, we become exactly what you thought we were. Monsters, we'd rather be human." The climax, the dying sun, the moment of peace was shattered. From the shadows of the Uit cloud, a third party arrived. A Krell purification swarm sent by the High Council not to rescue Vraxen, but to ensure no human technology or contamination survived to reach the gate. These were automated, mindless drones, programmed to detonate everything in the sector, including Vraxen's own men. "They've sent the swarm," Xylth whispered in horror. "They aren't closing the gate. They're blowing it up while we're still here." The swarm, thousands of crystalline shards, ignited their drives, streaking toward the gate and the human fleet. They were filled with antimatter. A single one hitting the gate would trigger a supernova-level event that would incinerate every ship within 1,000,000 miles. Vraxen watched as his own government's logic turned against him. They were the refined path, and they were choosing a refined total erasure. Target the swarm. Vraxen ordered his remaining ships. Protect the humans, but the Krell ships were too broken. Their lasers sputtered and died. The drones surged forward. Then, something happened that Vraxen would remember for the rest of his life. The human fleet didn't flee. They didn't turn their rail. guns on Vraxen. Instead, the 1,000-ship wall of the United Solar Navy moved forward. "What are they doing?" Vraxen gasped. "They're forming a screen," Xylth said, tears of blue ichor running down his face. "General, they're using their ships as shields for us." The USN Stalingrad and hundreds of smaller vessels accelerated, placing themselves directly in the path of the antimatter drones. They didn't use weapons. They didn't have time. They used their mass. One by one, the human ships were struck. The antimatter detonations were blinding, tearing through the thick human armor like paper. The Stalingrad took 3 hits to its main hull, its radiators shattering, its engines dying. Yet the humans held the line. They were dying by the thousands to save the enemy who had tried to exterminate them. Vraxen watched as a small human frigate, the Morning Star, threw itself in front of a drone headed for Vraxen's flagship. Frigate vanished in a flash of white, leaving nothing behind but a lingering heat signature. "Why?" Vraxen screamed at the screen at the silent Captain Vance. "Why are you dying for us?" The reply came through the static, weak and fading, "Because we're the only ones who can." The resolution, the weight of mercy, the swarm was depleted. The gate, though damaged, remained stable. The Krell High Council, seeing the failure of their drones and the sheer illogical bravery of the humans, finally severed the connection. The gate went dark, turning into a silent ring of cold mercury. The sector was a graveyard of human sacrifice. Vraxen's ship drifted alongside the wreckage of the Stalingrad. The human ship was a hollowed-out shell, venting the last of its atmosphere. "General," Xylth reported, "life signs are failing on the Stalingrad. Captain Vance is still on board. Their life support is gone." Vraxen didn't hesitate. "Deploy the repair drones. Send our remaining medical pods, all of them. Forget the ship, he saved the people. For the next 12 hours, the remaining Krell soldiers, the master race of the galaxy, worked side by side with human survivors. They shared oxygen tanks. They used Krell light, cutters to free humans trapped in crushed bulkheads. They used human medical kits to patch Krell wounds. In the ruins of the Stalingrad's bridge, Vraxen found Elena Vance. She was slumped over her console, her breathing shallow. He reached out with one of his 4 hands, a hand designed for war, and gently lifted her head. She opened her eyes and looked at the general. She didn't see a monster. She saw a tired old soldier. "You stayed," she whispered. "You gave us the choice," Vraxen replied, his voice thick with an emotion the Krell didn't have a word for. "We chose to be human." The final reflection months later, the Krell survivors were repatriated through a new, smaller gate built by the combined efforts of both species. Vraxen was the last to leave. He stood on the deck of a neutral transport, looking back at the sun he had once intended to extinguish. He had come to this system to teach a lesson in power, but he was leaving with a lesson in soul. He had learned that the humans were not defined by their weapons. Their rail guns were merely an extension of their history, but their hearts were an extension of their future. They were a species that lived in the contradiction between the forge and the field, capable of the most efficient violence the galaxy had ever seen, yet willing to burn their own lives to keep a stranger warm in the dark. He thought of the rocks that they threw. He realized now that they weren't just throwing metal. They were throwing the weight of their entire struggle to exist. And when they stopped throwing them, the silence that followed wasn't the silence of the Krell's refined path. It was the silence of peace. Vraxen looked at the report in his hands, destined for the High Council. It didn't contain tactical data. It contained a single line of human poetry, the one he had mocked at the start of the war. "The sun sets on the warrior, but the light remains in the heart of the home." He turned away from the vision of Earth, his mandibles clicking a slow, rhythmic salute. He knew that the hegemony would never be the same. The rounding error had become the center of the universe. Vraxen looked out at the stars, no longer seeing them as gardens to be weeded, but as a vast, dark ocean where, somewhere in the distance, A small, stubborn species was keeping the lights on. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human.